Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for February the 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. I hope you have had a very enjoyable Valentine's Day, and we're going to follow along on the topic of love as we continue on our Canadian Idols series, number 3 in the series. And we're going to be focusing upon Genesis chapter 29 as we look at the title, All You Need is Love. You know, there was a famous Beatles song back years ago where the Beatles sang, All You Need is Love. All you need is love. Friends, here's a question for you today. Is that true? Is love all you need? Some of you might be thinking, well, Pastor, it all depends on what you mean by the word love. And that's certainly true. But for the Beatles and most of our culture, the love that comes to mind as we hear that song has a romantic flavor to it. The common idea is that if you are in a relationship with someone that you really love and that person really loves you, then nothing else matters in life. All your problems, all the challenges of life can be conquered when one is in love. Even when things around you get tough, that relationship, that love relationship has the power to bring so much joy into your life. So, yes, for many people would say love is all you need. When we open the scriptures, however, we learn that's not quite the case. Though loving another person and being loved by that individual is a very good thing, there is something that's more important, and that is being loved by God and learning to love Him. To the extent that we make our relationship with another person, rather than our relationship with the Lord, the center of our souls, we flirt with a dangerous idolatry that can do great harm. So this morning we're going to look at one of the Bible's great love stories, that love story of Jacob and Rachel. And we'll be, as I said, exploring Genesis chapter 29. Now, let me warn you that some of you may be a little bit disappointed because the story of Jacob and Rachel is not your typical romance novel. This is not exactly a case where everyone ends up living happily ever after. In the scriptures and in the fallen world in which we live, human relationships don't always work out that way. And yet I'm convinced that God has some very important things to say to us through His Word today. Last Sunday we talked about Abraham, the great father of the Jewish people. He is a man who received the promise of God that someday all of the nations of the earth will be blessed through one of his descendants, a Messiah, a Savior. Abraham had one son, Isaac, and we talked about him last Sunday as well. Isaac married Rebekah. She became pregnant with twins, and the Lord told her that the elder will serve the younger. This meant that, contrary to normal protocol, the second-born twin was to carry on the family messianic line. In spite of that prophecy, Jacob still favored the older son, Esau, over the younger son, Isaac. And as a result, Esau grew up to be proud and spoiled and impulsive, while Jacob became very cynical and bitter. When Isaac was ready to give the official blessing, which would make Esau the head of the family, Jacob tricked him. In Genesis chapter 27, it describes how Jacob dressed up like his brother and went into his nearly blind father and received the blessing that Isaac had intended for Esau. An angry Esau vowed to kill his younger brother. So Jacob's parents encouraged him to leave home, which he does. At that point, Jacob's life is a mess. He no longer has a family or an inheritance, and he would never see Rebekah and Isaac alive again. He travels about 300 miles to live with his mother's relatives so he can survive. He gets a job with his uncle Laban and quickly gets promoted to the top shepherd of Laban's flocks of goats and sheep. When Laban asked, "What can I pay you for your work?" Jacob has a one-word answer: Rachel. Genesis chapter 29, verse 16 and 17 says, "Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance." The NLT simply says there was no sparkle in Leah's eyes. But when the NLT says Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face, it really hits the nail on the head. She's a very good-looking young lady. Then verse 21 says, after waiting 7 years, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed. I want her as my wife." Rachel is the object of both Jacob's love and his obsession. Though his love is very genuine, he was not only focused on what he could provide for Rachel, but also on what she could provide to him. Jacob seems convinced that having Rachel as his wife is going to solve all of his problems that he's been experiencing. Verses 22 and 23 says, "So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went in to her. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah." Maybe you're thinking, well, what happened here? What's going on? Well, Laban has pulled the old switcheroo. Just as Jacob had deceived Isaac, Laban now deceives Jacob. We might wonder how he didn't notice that one woman had been switched for the other, but whatever the reason, he realizes that he spent the night with Leah, and Jacob is understandably furious. He says to Laban in verse 25-26, "What is this you've done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." Or as the NLT says, "It's not our custom to marry off the younger daughter ahead of the firstborn." But Laban, and this guy's a classic, and he's got another deal for Jacob. In verse 27, he says, "But wait until the bridal week is over, then we'll give you Rachel as well, provided you promise to work another 7 years for me." It seems Jacob should have realized his uncle couldn't be trusted. But again, because of his obsession with Rachel, he agrees. If Laban had demanded, I think, 70 years of service for Rachel, Jacob would have probably agreed to it. His judgment is very impaired at this point. Genesis chapter 29, verse 28 tells us, "So Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave him Rachel as well." So they all lived happily ever after, right? All's well that ends well. Well, not quite. Verse 30 says, so Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. And as we'll see, Jacob becomes the head of one very messed up, dysfunctional family. Leah and Rachel are two sisters who at one time very deeply loved each other, and now they're very jealous of each other. And Leah, who though she's older, is clearly not Jacob's favorite. And she desperately tries to turn Jacob's affection from her sister to herself. Verse 31 and 32 says, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. Leah seems to have fallen into the same trap as Jacob, believing that she can find no real happiness until she has the relationship that she wants. And yet Leah never captures Jacob's affections. Verses 33 and 34 says, she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, this time my husband will be attracted to me, because I have bore him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. Tim Keller points out that at this point Leah realized she was on a dead-end street. She could have 15 sons, but never capture Jacob's heart as Rachel had. Verse 35 says, and she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she gave his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing children. Tension quickly arises in the sisters' relationship with each other. Chapter 30, verses 1 and 2, Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, and she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children, or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? In other words, he says to her, it's not my fault you don't have children. That's your problem, not mine. Eventually, Rachel does have a couple of sons, Jacob and Benjamin, and Jacob shows favoritism. Excuse me, that was Joseph and Benjamin. And Jacob shows favoritism to the 2 younger sons because they are Rachel's sons. And that causes more conflict and more complications within the family. But somehow, out of this love triangle of Jacob and Leah and Rachel, God still accomplishes his purposes. These 2 gals, assisted by their servants, give Jacob 12 sons, who within a few generations become the 12 tribes of Israel. The promise God made Abraham, your descendants will become a great nation, becomes a reality through these sons of Jacob. Friends, this is an important and a wonderful lesson for all of us to keep in mind. Our goof-ups don't goof up God's plan. He finds a way to accomplish his purposes, even when we stray far off the pathway that he has planned for us. This is really good news for those of us who have done that once in a while. Yet there are some important lessons we can learn from the mistakes of Jacob. Let's look at 4 of them. Number 1, obsession with a relationship is not a good thing. Many of the problems that Jacob encountered, much of the pain that he and the people around him experienced, was rooted in his obsession with Rachel. Relationship obsessions today produce equally disastrous results. Some are obsessed with relationships they don't have. It's in the extreme. It's that this becomes stalking, where, for example, Joe follows Mary around, believing that despite her protests, she is meant to be his wife. She just doesn't realize it yet. However, when two people are in love with each other, obsession is also not good. Occasionally, a couple comes in for premarital counseling, and it becomes very evident that one of the prospective partners is obsessed with the other. He can't, for example, see how he could ever live without her. Friends, that might sound romantic, but that attribute is a recipe for disaster. For one thing, no human being is capable of meeting those exalted expectations. If Joe thinks his wife Mary is a goddess, he's likely to be possessive and jealous of her. He will always probably become disappointed and angry with her when she acts like a mere mortal. Someone says, "Oh, John is so in love with Mary, he worships the ground she walks on." Well, if that is in any real sense literally true, it is wrong and dangerous. We must never worship another human being, no matter how much we love them, him or her. God alone is worthy of our worship. Number two, losing a relationship can be a very painful thing in life, but it's not the end. What happens when Mary tells Joe she wants to go out with Bill instead of him? What happens when Bill tells Sue that he's filing for divorce and moving in with Jane? Well, in those cases, Joe and Sue usually feel as if their hearts have been broken in two. Desperation and despair can easily set in. But like Lee, those who have been rejected have a choice. When she realized she would never be the one that Jacob really loved, Lee apparently turned to the Lord and found her significance, her security, and her joy in the Lord's love. Friend, if you are a Christian, a believer in Jesus Christ, that is where your true significance, your true security already lies. And this is where you should be finding your satisfaction and your joy. Yeah, I know it can be painful when, the girlfriend dumps you. I know it can be devastating when your husband files for divorce. But if you are a Christian, you're going to be okay. Even if you lose everything else, including the person whom you love the most, as long as you have Jesus, you have what you need. I want to say a word to you who are widows and widowers. What was just said applies to you as well. Losing your spouse is a devastating experience. It's very painful. And it's good that it hurts a lot. You really don't want to be like the woman who says, the happiest day of my life was when my husband died after 30 hellish years of being married to him. If you loved your husband or your wife, it's only natural that you will grieve that loss. Not for 6 months or a year, but probably for the rest of your life. But that doesn't mean you have to wallow in despair. As a Christian, Jesus Christ is the ultimate source of significance and security for you. As long as you have him, you'll be okay. And even while you grieve, there's no reason why you cannot, there cannot be joy in your heart and a smile on your face. You can still live each day seeking to serve others, bringing glory to the Lord. By God's grace, you can do it. Number 3, God intends for us to be in relationships with other people. There are some folk who decide because relationships are fragile and often very complicated and frequently disappointing, they're just not worth it. So, like Paul Simon, they sing and they decide, I have no need for friendship. Friendship causes pain. I am a rock. I am an island. Folk, God never intended any human being to live like that. Even someone who feels that they should never marry needs to have good, healthy relationships with other people. As Christians, I think most of those relationships will be found within the church. Friend, it's wrong. It is sin to build up a wall around your heart because of bad experiences you fear or that you've had. Because of the love God has shown us, we need to love others, even though that love will not always be reciprocated. Number 4, we may think we have Rachel, but when we wake up, it'll always be Lee. By that I mean that every human relationship, every friendship, every marriage will in some way be disappointing at times. No matter how wonderful your spouse or your loved one is, he or she is still human. And their words and their actions and their attitudes will sometimes not be what they should be. And that can be disappointing and painful. When that happens, people often head down one of 3 dead-end roads. First of all, they blame the person who disappointed them, become angry with them, end the relationship, and try to find someone else who will not disappoint them at any point. And yet, no matter how many Rachels we think we may have found, they always end up being Lees because nobody is perfect. The second dead-end response is to blame ourselves, deciding that there's something wrong with me and that we simply are not capable of being in a healthy, happy relationship. That type of self-loathing seldom brings any joy to life. It's not true. The third dead end is to blame the world. And this is what I mentioned a moment ago. You say, all men or all women, they're all that way. I don't need any of them. And you start to make yourself hard and cynical and empty. Yet realizing every Rachel is really a Lee, that there's no such thing as a perfect human relationship, can cause us to turn down the road which leads to true eternal joy. C.S. Lewis said, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I am made for another world, for a supernatural and eternal world. Folks, I believe that is indeed the truth. Our disappointments in relationships should cause us to realize that it is only in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ that we can find significance, security, satisfaction, and joy because of His great love for us. Our love for Him should be greater than our love for any human being. We should trust Him more than we trust any human being. And yes, we should worship Him and Him alone. Is love all we need? Yes, the love of God for us in Jesus Christ is all we need. Even if every human relationship we know turns against us, The knowledge that God is for us can sustain us. Oh, human relationships are marvelous gifts from God, don't get me wrong. We should cherish and cultivate them. But the love of God found in Jesus Christ, that is truly all that we need. God bless. Have a wonderful day, and until we meet again, let's continue to exchange prayers daily.